Revenge with Anjo.
Nathaniel Ward had spent 40 years believing he was Elliot Ward's twin brother. They shared a birthday, a surname, and an unspoken hierarchy. Elliot, 2 minutes older, 2 inches taller, and somehow always the chosen one. When their parents died in a car crash in the Alps, the £65 million family fortune went to Elliot alone. Nathaniel got a handshake and a perfunctory check for $50,000. It stung, but he told himself he'd survived worse. That was before the call from London, from a voice that would unravel everything he thought he knew about blood and belonging. The woman's tone was careful, almost rehearsed. "Mr. Ward, this is Dr. Amara Lennox from St. Ives Medical Archives. We've reopened a 1984 neonatal study. Your records triggered a data anomaly." Nathaniel frowned. "I think you've got the wrong person. I've never been in any study."
There was a pause, a sigh.
"You were entered by your parents at birth. We'd like to verify a few details in person." She wouldn't say more, just that it involved his brother and that it was urgent and confidential. That night, Nathaniel sat in his small flat in Brighton, the sea wind rattling the windows. His job as a freight logistics officer barely paid the bills, but he liked the routine. Ships came and went, tides shifted, paperwork followed. Predictable. Unlike the Ward family. He stared at the invitation to visit Elliot's estate in Surrey still pinned to his fridge. Ward Manor, carved into iron gates, lawns manicured within an inch of their lives. He hadn't been back since the funeral. "Mate, you look like you've seen a ghost," his co-worker, Simon, said the next morning. Nathaniel managed a weak smile. "Maybe I have. A doctor called something about me and my brother." Simon raised a brow. "Oh, the fancy one with the big house?
What do they want?"
Nathaniel shrugged. "That's what I'm going to find out." He didn't tell him that his stomach had been in knots ever since the call, or that he'd barely slept imagining what data anomaly could possibly mean. The journey from Brighton to London was grey and damp, the kind of weather that matched his thoughts. By the time he reached the St. Ives building in Chelsea, the drizzle had thickened into a mist. The receptionist looked surprised when he gave his name, as though she'd been warned someone important was coming. "Dr. Lennox will be right with you, Mr. Ward." The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and old secrets. When Dr. Amara Lennox appeared, she didn't look like a scientist from the glossy magazines. Her hair was messy, glasses askew, a pen tucked behind her ear. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," she said, shaking his hand. Her grip was warm but trembling. "I'll be honest, this isn't a conversation I have often." Nathaniel managed a polite nod. "What kind of conversation is that?" She gestured toward a glass office. Inside were 2 files marked Ward, 1984. "Your parents enrolled twins in a neonatal monitoring program," she began carefully. "Routine blood tests, early child markers, nothing unusual at the time. But when we digitized the data, we noticed something we can't explain." She opened one folder and slid a page across to him. "The hospital where you were supposedly born, St. Bridget's Maternity, filed only 1 live birth that day. Elliot Ward. There's no record of a second twin." Nathaniel blinked, certain he'd misheard. "That's ridiculous." "My birth certificate was filed 2 weeks later," she interrupted softly. "Different handwriting, different witness signatures. It looks authentic, but it isn't standard format for 1984. And your hospital number doesn't exist in their database." "So, what are you saying? That I just appeared out of thin air?" Dr. Lennox hesitated. "Not quite. We believe there was a substitution at the clinic, a mix-up, or perhaps a cover-up." He stared at her, the world suddenly tilting. "You mean I was switched?"
"Possibly.
We found evidence that another infant died during delivery that same morning. The mother's identity was sealed, a private patient admitted under confidentiality. Her file vanished a week later. But your blood sample, stored for decades, carries markers inconsistent with the Ward's family line. It's not a match to either of your parents." Nathaniel felt his throat close. "That can't be right. My father, Your DNA shares no link with Charles or Helena Ward." The words hit him like a physical blow. He leaned back in his chair, hearing the faint hum of the building around them, the tick of the clock, the way Dr. Lennox's pen clicked twice before she spoke again. Mr. Ward, your brother's DNA was recently submitted for a medical genealogy project. That's how we caught the discrepancy. It seems someone ensured you were recorded as twins when, biologically, you weren't even related. Nathaniel let out a harsh laugh that startled them both. So, what does that make me? A replacement part. It makes you the victim of a deception, she replied gently. One that likely began in that hospital. I can't tell you who arranged it. The records were altered too thoroughly, but I can tell you it wasn't a mistake. Someone made sure you'd grow up as a Ward. He looked out through the glass at people walking past, unaware that the ground beneath his identity had just vanished. He drove to Surrey that evening without really deciding to. The motorway blurred by in streaks of red and white light. By the time he reached Ward Manor, the gates opened automatically, like they'd been expecting him. Elliot stood at the doorway, immaculate as always, tailored navy jumper, whiskey in hand, the picture of confidence. Well, this is a surprise, Elliot said, smiling tightly. Come in, Nate. You look like you've seen a ghost. Nathaniel met his brother's eyes and said quietly, Maybe I have. Inside the manor, the air smelled faintly of oak polish and old money. Elliot poured whiskey into crystal glasses, his movements precise, rehearsed. So, he said, handing Nathaniel a glass. You finally came back. Took you long enough. Nathaniel didn't sit. Why wasn't my name in the hospital records? The question landed like a stone in water. Elliot's eyes flickered. You've been talking to someone. Dr. Amara Lennox, Nathaniel replied. She says there's no record of my birth, no link to Mum or Dad. You want to tell me what that's about? Elliot sighed, rubbed his forehead. You shouldn't have gone digging. I had a right to know. No, Nate, Elliot said quietly. You had a right to peace. Mum wanted you to have that much. Nathaniel set the glass down hard. Peace? You mean ignorance. Elliot walked to the window, staring into the manicured darkness. It wasn't meant to get this far. Mum had a letter. I found it after the funeral. I didn't think you'd ever learn the truth. Nathaniel's voice was a whisper. Then tell me now. Elliot opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope aged to a faint yellow. Helena Ward's handwriting was unmistakable, elegant, deliberate. Across the front, for Elliot only. After we're gone, he slid it across the table. I've read it 100 times. Every word still makes my stomach turn. Nathaniel hesitated before opening it. The letter was dated 1995. My dearest Elliot, if you are reading this, then the past has finally caught up to us. There was never meant to be a twin. There was an accident at St. Bridget's, a stillbirth, one that should have ended in silence. But your father couldn't bear to see me broken. Another infant had survived that same morning, a boy born to a woman who didn't make it. The hospital begged for discretion. Charles made it happen. We brought him home as our own. Nathaniel felt his vision blur. His mother's handwriting spoke of love and shame in equal measure.
He was ours, Elliot.
Not by blood, but by grace. We named him Nathaniel because it meant gift. But I could never forget what he reminded me of, what I lost that day. Your father swore it would stay buried. Forgive me if I couldn't love him the same way I loved you. It wasn't his fault. It was mine. He dropped the letter onto the table, breathing hard. So, I was a replacement. The ghost of your stillborn brother. Elliot's expression softened.
No, Nate.
You were the one who gave her a reason to keep living. Don't romanticize it. You knew, didn't you? Elliot nodded slowly. I found out 3 years ago, after Dad's stroke. His solicitor slipped up. I hired a private investigator. I just didn't know how to tell you. Instead, you let me walk out of that well with 50 grand. Elliot's jaw tightened. That wasn't my choice. Everything was already structured. If I changed it, it would have raised questions. The money wasn't the point. It's always the point with you, Nathaniel snapped. You think you're the only one who's had to carry the truth? Try living 40 years as a lie. Elliot said nothing. The silence stretched between them until Nathaniel turned to leave. Wait, Elliot said suddenly. He opened a safe behind the desk and retrieved a second folder. There's more you don't know. The woman who gave birth to you, her name was Lily Finch. She worked at one of Father's developments in East London. She was 22. She died during labor. Her sister tried to claim you, but Father paid her to disappear. Nathaniel froze. Paid her? A trust fund. She never touched it. I tracked her down last year. She lives in Oxford now. She's been looking for you for decades. He slid a card across the desk. Ruth Finch. An address scrawled beneath. Nathaniel stared at it as if it might burn him. Why are you giving this to me now? Elliot's voice cracked. Because I've had enough of lies. You deserve to know who you are. Nathaniel pocketed the card. I'll find her. Elliot nodded. Good. Just be careful what you ask. Sometimes the answers don't fix anything. Nathaniel turned toward the door. Then maybe I'll stop asking questions once I start living my own life. As he left, Elliot called after him. You'll always be my brother, Nate. Paper or blood. It doesn't change that. Nathaniel didn't answer. He drove through the Surrey night until dawn lit the road signs. Oxford, 32 miles. The motorway unfurled like a promise. The first coffee shop opened as he pulled into the city. The woman sitting by the window looked up before he spoke. Her hair was gray now, but her eyes were bright, the same sharp blue as his own. Nathaniel, she said before he could introduce himself. I knew you'd come one day. Ruth Finch's hands trembled as she poured the tea. Lily was my little sister, she said softly. She adored the man who got her pregnant, some wealthy developer from London. Said he'd marry her once his wife recovered from illness. Lies, of course. When she went into labor early, she called me from a hospital. I never got to her in time. Nathaniel listened, the words weaving a painful clarity. So your sister, she was involved with my Charles Ward, Ruth finished.
Yes.
He was your father. Helena knew. They covered it up to save his reputation. He was already climbing politically then. Lily's death ruined her family. The hospital paid for silence, and you were taken. He felt hollow. They called me a gift, he whispered. Ruth reached across the table, gripping his hand. You were love. Lily didn't die for nothing. She used her last breath to ask the nurses to save you. That's why I've never stopped searching. You deserve to know the truth. He left Oxford that afternoon with a box of Lily's belongings, a photograph of a young woman with his eyes, a birth bracelet, a letter she'd written to my son, if you ever see this. He read it in his car outside the city. You were loved before you ever breathed. Don't let their names define you. Find your own. The words broke something open inside him. Back in Brighton, Nathaniel stood by the shore, the letter folded in his pocket. He called Elliot. You were right, he said quietly. Knowing doesn't fix everything. Elliot's voice on the other end was rough. But it's a start, isn't it? Maybe, Nathaniel replied. For both of us. Weeks passed before they met again. This time, at a small cafe near the Thames, neutral ground, no manner, no titles. Elliot looked thinner, more human. I've been speaking to the lawyers, he said. I'm setting up a trust. Half the estate goes to you. It's what Father would have wanted if he'd had the decency to face what he'd done. Nathaniel shook his head. I don't want it. Elliot blinked. What do you mean? Keep the money. Sell the properties. Do whatever you like. I'm done measuring my worth in pounds and wills. I've got something better, a name that's mine. Nathaniel Finch. The words felt right, strange, freeing. Elliot smiled faintly. Mom would hate that. Then I'll take that as a blessing. Over time, the brothers began to rebuild, not as wards bound by inheritance, but as two men linked by choice. They met every Sunday morning, alternating between Brighton and London. Sometimes they argued. Sometimes they just sat in silence, sipping tea and watching the rain. Slowly, honesty became a habit neither wanted to break. A year later, Nathaniel launched the Lily Finch Foundation, dedicated to helping children separated from families through medical fraud or adoption secrecy. Elliot became one of its first donors. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Maybe this is how we make peace with them, Elliot said one afternoon. Nathaniel nodded. By doing what they couldn't, telling the truth. When Ruth died the following winter, Nathaniel scattered her ashes by the Brighton pier. "You found me," he whispered, voice trembling against the sea wind. "And I'll make sure no one else ever gets lost the way we were." Behind him, Elliot stood quietly, hand on his shoulder. For the first time, family didn't feel like an obligation. It felt earned. Years later, when Elliot's son was born, he called Nathaniel from the hospital. "We named him Charles," he said. "After father?" "No," Elliot replied. "After the man I wish he'd been." Nathaniel laughed softly. "Then he's got a chance." He hung up, staring out at the gray sea. He wasn't a Ward, not by blood or by law. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't pretending to belong. He did in his own name, his own story. And that, finally, was enough. If you value stories of respect, dignity, and justice, please subscribe. It means more than you know, and it lets me keep sharing the lessons life has carved into me.